Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, DDEX webinar, which is going to examine the way in which DDEX expresses what we call deals in our standards, most particularly within the ERN standard, but also with regard to some of the other standards as well. My name is Mark Isherwood, and along with my colleague Niels Rump, we make up part of the DDEX Secretariat. I will be providing a short overview of DDEX. Many of you are familiar with what we do and what we are, but just in case there are some who are not. And then also look at the sort of information that needs to be expressed within the ERN messages. And then Niels will go on and look in a lot more detail into the way in which deals are expressed in the ERN messages and consequently in other standards as well. Please feel free to ask any questions. The best way to do that is to put them into the chat, and we will try and pick those up as we go along. As I'm sure most of you know, DDEX is a standards development organization operating primarily in the music industry. We really focus on three areas when we're developing standards, all aimed at creating as efficient as possible communication of data up and down the music industry value chain. Probably the area that is most commonly talked about are the formats of the messages, that is the order and the relationship between certain data fields and how they all hold together. The second area is choreographies, where we determine the order in which messages should be exchanged and define trigger points that determine that a message should be sent. And then finally, the protocols are the mechanisms by which the messages are actually sent or received. Up until the last 4 or 5 years, that's primarily focused on FTP or secure FTP, things like directory structures and file naming conventions. But increasingly, the standards are where they're being used are being exchanged using web services. And we believe that is a trend that will continue as we move to more and more automation around the exchange of DDEX messages. So at the moment, DDEX has 8 families of standards that are represented there. You will see the little black circles sort of represent different types of organizations in the music industry or roles that they play. And then the lines in between them indicate the sorts of standards that they would use from the DDEX group of standards to exchange data of various different types relating to specific business transactions. And whilst it may seem that all of those could very well be very different, they are in fact all built up on common building blocks. What you see, for example, in the radar standard, which is the sort of light greeny yellow line coming down from record companies to music licensing companies, what you see there will look very similar to what you might see on the pink line. The structures are very much common, also the elements of the structures are common. And at the core of what we do is the DDEX data dictionary. It's the lingua franca of the music industry now. If you don't speak DDEX, it's going to be increasingly difficult for you to communicate with your business partners in the music industry. And indeed, some people have referred to DDEX as a language, or at least a translator. And if you consider that the way in which you set up a DDEX message, if you're going to send DDEX messages, you have to map your data model and your database environment to the relevant fields within the DDEX message. And then when your business partner receives it, they have to do the reverse. And that means that by using DDEX, two companies that may have different data models, very different setups within their database, they can actually speak to each other and know what each is talking about. So the data dictionary is very important to DDEX and the way it operates. It contains the semantics of all the terms in all of the messages, and also contains the structure of the common composites, which is what I was referring to earlier about building blocks. Certain entities like parties or sound recordings have a number of data points on them in order that they can be effectively described. And so these composites are common building blocks that get used throughout the standards, and make it easier to adopt a new standard, because a lot of the code that you may have used for a previous standard can be used again, because these common composites will fall throughout the messages. And these days DDEX is ubiquitous. At the moment there's over 6,500 implementation licenses issued. Sadly, DDEX itself doesn't have a great deal of information about who has done implementations other than hearsay and talking to people. There is no sort of formal register, but there isn't really a company that's serious about operating effectively in the music industry that is not using DDEX in some form or another. And so it is now very much a key part of the operational side of the music industry. So to sort of set things up for Niels to talk in more detail about the deals, well, I just wanted to give you a sort of overview of the way in which we set up DDEX messages, where we are looking at the metadata, which is usually the data about the stuff, and the commercial data, which is the data about the deals. So the way all of DDEX messages are set up and laid out is that they are self-contained. In other words, you have all the information you need about a particular business transaction within an individual message. We don't deal with updates, so any message you receive is a statement of the truth in regard to the entities contained within the message at that moment in time. So the next time that you need to receive information, or there is a change to some small piece of data, you will receive the whole message again with the change, and you should treat that as the truth at that given time. We therefore don't daisy chain messages through updates and work of that nature. And all of the messages contain sort of three elements to them. One is the sort of basic administrative information, which is essentially stuff about the message itself. Then there's the metadata, which is describing the parties and the musical entities, the stuff as we sometimes call it, and then the commercial information. So just to delve a little deeper into those, the administrative data is who sent the message and to whom and when did they send it. The parties and the stuff is who created what sound recording or musical work or whatever it happens to be. And then there's the commercial information, which indicates how the music can be used, and how was it used. And this is translated in ERN 3, where you can see within the structure of the message these three different sort of types of data. So the basic stuff is that at the top in the blue square is the message sender, update indicator, and then around the orange is things like the work list, the resource list and information about the content that is being exchanged. And then the last one is the deal data, and that's what Niels will talk about in a little bit more detail shortly. And the same can be seen here in the musical work license message. You've still got your message header and message purpose. You've got the party list here, which is about the stuff itself, the work list and the rights share list. The musical work licensing message is used to for usually a record company to request a license to use a musical work, so they have to have the share data, and that's what the right share list is. And then the commercial data here is about a license, which is obviously a commercial entity, and the request for license will have the details of what they want, such as territory, type of usage, and so on and so forth. Similarly, in the DSR, the digital sales report, this is not an XML formatted message, but a structured flat file. And again, you can see these various elements here. The administrative data is essentially the header and the footer, and then the parties and the stuff is in the middle here, and then the commercial data is the usage. The top purple square is a summary record, and then the bottom pink square, sorry, gives the detail of the sales that have taken place. So that's an explanation of the types of data that we're using across all of the various standards, and there's a similar sort of analysis to a large extent can be applied to all of the standards. So that's the sort of introduction, and I'm now going to hand over to Niels to go on about deals, particularly ERN 4.
Good morning, everybody, from me as well. So Marcus laid out the landscape, if you like, how we communicate deal information in principle alongside the information about the stuff and the people that people would, in the ERN case, what is need to be made available, who has created the stuff that is need to be made available by DSP, and now we're talking about the how and why can that stuff be made available. I'll focus on ERN 4 in this case. The deal section of ERN 3, which is the predecessor version of the ERN message and the one that is currently still most prevalent in the market, looks comparatively similar. There are some additions that we have added to ERN 4 since we published ERN 4 about 2 years ago, I think. And I know that a number of the major record companies, major DSPs, and smaller companies are in the process of updating their supply chain to using ERN 4. But virtually everything I say here about ERN 4 applies more or less ad verbatim to ERN 3 as well. Still, I'll give you how the latest standard looks like. The ERN message, just as a very quick reminder, is a message from a record company to a digital service provider, to a DSP. Can of course also be sent by an aggregator on behalf of a record company, and it basically allows a DSP to make available a set of releases containing a set of sound recordings using a number of musical works available in the way described in the message in the deal. It basically gives the DSP a license to publish the music, the sound recordings, not the musical work. The ERN message doesn't talk at all about the underlying musical work, other than providing reference data, the writers and those kind of piece of information. But obtaining a license for using and distributing musical works, that is outside of the scope of the ERN message that is dealt in other standards. Very critically, the ERN message doesn't stand alone. It is governed and works in conjunction with the contract between the record company and the DSP. So no record company will send an ERN message just to any DSP. They will always do that under the auspices, if you like, of a contract between those two parties. And even if they're an aggregator involved, there will still be a contract between the record company and the DSP. And it's quite important to note this, that all the terms that the DDEX standards use must be understood in the context of this contract between the record company and the DSP. There are two precursors that I wanted to raise. One I kind of already talked about, that DDEX terms are generic. The other one, though, is also quite important. DDEX standards, or the ERN standard, communicates sound recordings and they communicate releases. Releases are basically bundles of sound recordings and other resources such as videos or images and so forth. But it's the releases, these bundles, that are traded. It's not the sound recordings that are traded or the videos that are traded. So any kind of tradable asset that you would want to point a deal to needs to be a release. These collections of resources, these releases, are being traded, even if it's just one sound recording. In that case, it's a track release, as it's called. In ERN 3, it's still communicated in the release composite. In ERN 4, we actually have a specific track release for these, for these track releases. And that's critically, specifically for streaming. And I'll come back to that in a little bit of time. And as I said earlier, the DDEX terms are generic. So the semantics we use in our messages, defining something or supporting, for example, permanent download, we've given it a meaningful definition, but whether a specific service in a specific territory is actually offering a permanent download, or whether it's some kind of other service that they're doing, that has to be looked at in the context of the contract between the DSP and the record company. That is nothing that DDEX can actually do. All we can provide is the mechanism to talk about it, but which specific way of handling things by which specific DSP falls under which of those terms, that is clearly outside of the scope for DDEX, and that needs to be kept in mind. Having said that, in most cases, it is pretty obvious whether something is a permanent download or whether it's something as a non-interactive stream. So in most cases, it's clear, but in some cases, it might not be that clear. One critical bit about the DDEX messages, and Mark has talked about the different sections that each of those messages has, is how do we make sure that those different bits actually work together? And we're doing that by linking these different sections to one another. So the ERN message has a section which lists parties, the writers, as well as the recording artists, the producers, the engineers, the record companies that publish the releases. They're just all parties. You have the sound recordings, and within the sound recordings, you have a section which lists the contributors. Within the release section, you have a section which we call the resource group, which then basically puts all the sound recordings together in the right order so that they can be presented to consumers. And we then link from one to the other. So from the contributor, we point to the party reference, and from the resource group, we point to the resource reference. That's a mechanism typically referred to as ID ref. Those are the two data types that XML uses for these anchors and pointers to those anchors. And we use the same mechanism when it comes to introducing the deal. So here is the overall structure of a release deal, as it's called. On the right-hand side, you have the release deal reference. That is the deal release reference. That is the pointer from the deal to a release. And then you have all the other bits, the deal terms, the distribution channel information, and so forth. You then have the pointer from the release deal to the release reference. And that basically means that the deal at the lower part of the screen now applies to that specific release, that specific release, whether that's a single track release, or whether that's an album release, doesn't matter. Can be extended by providing deals for specific technical instances. So if you have, for example, two different deals, two different price points, for example, for a lossy codec presented audio file and one for a losslessly presented audio file, you can do that. In that case, you would simply point to a technical resource detail reference within the sound recording as well as the release reference. In that case, you then have, you say, well, it's this release, but it's this specific technical instantiation of the individual sound recordings that this deal applies to. So this is how a deal looks like in the XML schema viewer. A deal comprises of a deal reference. That's a free-form string in which you basically can include any kind of information. I don't know, this is deal under clause 55 of our mutual agreement. Those kind of things can be included there. I don't think it's used very much, but that's the purpose of that. Theoretically, deals can be communicated out of band, so not part of the in the DDEX message. You're simply saying, oh, by the way, it's a deal under contract 55. I'm not going to give you any further details. And then you can set that flag to true. Again, I don't think it's used very much. The main bit, as I said already, is the deal terms. And then you have the deal technical resource details. That's what I just talked about giving the ability to have a deal apply not just for a release, but specific technical resource details for specific sound recordings or specific videos. And then you have a distribution channel page. I'm not going to go into those details. The deal terms, that's the crucial bit. And I'll just go quickly over this list, and because that is a bit too small, let's blow those things up. So what are the different aspects of a deal that can be communicated? And you see that most of those aspects are actually optional. The only thing you have to have is a validity period. You have to say either from when or until when is a deal valid. All the other bits of information can be provided. Most of the time, some of them are provided. So a territory is usually provided, a use type is provided, but you don't have to provide them. The first bit, again, the territory code. You need to say usually in normal deals for which territories does a deal apply or not apply. So you can say it applies to Canada, Mexico, and the US, or you can say it is everywhere worldwide, excluding Japan, if you want to do. You then have a validity period. I'll talk a little bit about time and periods in a moment. You have information about the commercial model type. Is something a pay-as-you-go model? Is something a subscription? Is something done under a advertisement-supported model? You have use type, which is the differentiation between permanent download, a streaming service, or those kind of different things. And there are different types of subscription and different types of commercial models. DDEX has a number of terms there, but again, they need to be mapped to specific terms used in the contract between the parties involved to make this message actually work as intended. The user interface type had actually been taken out of the first version of ERN 4 and has been recently reintroduced specifically to deal with karaoke kind of scenarios where there is a specific type of device by which consumers interact with the music, in this case, a karaoke machine. Carrier type, that deals with specifically physical products. Is something available as a CD? Is it available as a vinyl LP? Is it a vinyl single? Is it a DAT tape or whatever it may be? Those kind of things. Number of usage, technical instantiation, I'll pass over. Number of usages is something that specifically talks about how often a specific release may be used by consumers until that deal is being exhausted. I don't know, a label may say to a DSP, here you have one deal that says that album can be purchased for $1, or it doesn't really matter. And here is a 50-cent rebate deal, but that only applies for 1,000 releases. So send it to the first 1,000 for a discounted price, and after that, the full price applies. These kind of deals can be communicated using that feature. Distribution channel, excluded distribution channel, that is specific to DSPs that offer white label services. So you have a DSP aggregator, if you like, that offers white label services to different DSP front ends. And if you want to make a deal available through a specific front end, then you can use the distribution channel, or again, you can exclude a specific distribution channel, which is typically used. You have one deal for this specific distribution channel, and then you have one second deal for all the other distribution channels apart from that one. That's why you have the distribution channel and excluded distribution channel mechanism side by side. Rights claim policy is quite a powerful tool for user-generated content sites. That enables a record company to say, here's a piece of music, and if somebody tries to upload this piece of music or use this piece of music as part of a UGC creation, and if it's more than 50%, I want that to be blocked. If less than 50% but more than 30%, I want this to be remunerated, and if it's less than 10%, just let me know. These kind of pieces of information, or these kind of informations, are quite common in the user-generated content world, and works quite well. Price information can be either price points defined in monetary terms, so specific currency, specific value, but also with respect to some kind of a cheat sheet where they have a specific code for a price tier, if you like. You can provide information whether something is promotional or not, and you can provide a promotional code for those kind of things. I talked about in the number of usages, for example, how things can be made as a promotional. These kind of initial promotions or first 1,000 or whatever, that typically would be some kind of a promo. And it may need to be reported back in the sales usage reporting to the record company that something was sold under that promotional. In that case, this promotional code is something that will come quite handy. The next two tags here are for pre-orders. So if you're having an album that is available from the 1st of January, but you want to have it available for people to order it from the 1st of December, and maybe some of the tracks will be delivered immediately if somebody pre-orders the album. That can be done with a pre-order deal, which is just a flag, and then a list of the tracks which should be immediately fulfilled upon pre-ordering the album. And the last two again are for physical products, which I'm not going to go into at this stage. So here is an example deal, and there's lots in the composite as I've just shown you, but if you're looking at a deal, it's actually in most cases remarkably simple. So here is a deal, and you have the deal release reference that points to the release. In this case, it's the release R1 that is being provided with a deal that the DSP may now make available. And you have the deal terms. Specifically, it's for the US and for Canada, and it starts on the 1st of January 2021. On this, just one note, we're trying to get more precise with this, so we're phasing out dates in favor of date times. How a date time looks like, I'll show you in a minute, but I wanted to mention that in this context. And the last bit, you then have the subscription model and the non-interactive stream as the commercial model type and the use type. that's all there is to a straightforward deal for 2 territories from a specific date for a non-interactive subscription streaming service. Fairly straightforward. And if you're looking at that in ERN 3, it looks slightly different, but it's, yeah, not more complex, not less complex. The order is slightly different, but that's all there is as difference between ERN 3 and ERN 4. You may now ask, why did we change the deal in ERN 4? ERN 4 has a number of other changes that made it not compatible with ERN 3. Therefore, we were at liberty to reorder things in a more logical way. In ERN 3, the order after basically 20 years of development was not very logical in places, and we just cleaned that up in that stage. But the piece of information is still exactly the same. So for the rest of this morning, well, my morning, I'd like just to go through a couple of use cases and practical examples that we as DDEX know are sometimes sticky and have provided problems to people. We have documented all of these cases on the knowledge base. If you go to kb.ddex.net, on the left-hand side, there is a deals and commercial aspects section in the frequently asked questions portion of that website. And all of these cases that I'm talking about are documented in one way or another on that side. And if you have any further questions or any questions on what I've said so far, please do not hesitate, just ask questions on the chat and I'll try to answer them then. First of all, you cannot stream an album. It took us quite a while to actually realize that, but actually streaming an album doesn't really make a sense. What you would need to do is you would stream actually, or you create a playlist of streaming 10 track releases. Not 10 tracks, but 10 track releases. Remember, I said that every commercial offer is with respect of a release, not with a sound recording, and this applies here. But still, it's the individual track releases that are being streamed, and if it's a 10-track album, you basically create a little playlist of those 10 track releases. That means, of course, that once you create an ERN message for a streaming service, you need to make sure that you have your 10 track releases set up correctly, and then point all of your individual deals, or the one deal that you may have for all those 10 track releases, point to those 10 track releases. And in that case, you'll be fine. One of the most discussed topics within DDEX's history, I think, are takedowns in ERN. And to be honest, we've changed how things should be done over time, a number of times. In the end, and I think this is the solution that will now stick, is that there are 2 options by which you can take down a release. The nice option, or the usual option, is to use the new release message. Everybody has implemented the new release message because that's the ERN message after all, isn't it? If you just provide a new release message, just the metadata without any deal, that tells the DSP, because there is now no deal of that for that release anymore, to take it down. Doesn't mean that they have to remove the metadata from its system, but they must not make it available to anyone anywhere anymore. This is the only place where a new release message is being sent without any deal. In all other cases, you need to have some kind of deal. Theoretically possible is a first initial ERN message without any deal information, but the ERN working group within DDEX has determined that that is actually not a very good thing to do, at least provide a deal at that stage, how the stuff is being made available, even if that is far in the future. But for a takedown, just provide an ERN message without any deal, and that's your notice for the DSP to to have the stuff taken down. There's one snag with this approach though, and that is those cases where, especially when a catalog transfer has taken place and a record company has taken over somebody else's catalog, and they simply do not have the metadata as it was originally sent to the DSP in their system, which means they cannot really send the new release message to the DSP to take it down. And that's where we develop this purge release message, which is a very simple message which just provides minimal reference descriptive metadata for the release, and through that asks the DSP to take it down. It is typically followed by a new release message to basically with a new deal to keep the release up, but now with the metadata as it is wanted by the new owning label. But this message can also be used as a plain old takedown, because that's in the end what that message is. But not everybody has implemented the purge release message. I think all the labels have, but I'm not sure whether all the DSPs have. But there you go. Those are the two messages to take down a release. But that brings me directly to the way to update deals, or actually to update metadata for that matter, because the same principle of just sending the state of affairs as it is now, as I see it now, applies here as well, the statement of truth, as Mark has called it earlier. So whether it's a metadata update, or whether it's a new deal, or an update of an old deal, or no deal at all, or just canceling one deal but 5 others stay in place, well, you just need to send all the active deals as they are known now and omit those that do not apply anymore. Of course, if that switchover period is only in 3 days' time, I still need to provide the deal from now till that switchover time. So in that case, I may need to provide more deals for the time being, and then in 3 days' time, some of those deals start to lose their value because they have outlived their welcome. But if I send all the deals as they are now, I should be fine. And please remember, also include the correct metadata. It needs to be a complete message with all the information that is needed at that moment in time. The other topic that caused quite a number of discussions and still causes some grief in places is dealing with the start dates and end dates of deals. We need to recognize that DDEX is a global standard, and therefore we need to be able to deal with things like time zones and those kind of things. And because of this issue, we're trying to move companies to use date time rather than dates in their messages. Now, you can provide a date like 2015-12-01 representing the 1st of December 2015. But if we're dealing with multiple time zones, we don't really know when does that start, when does it end. So it is a little bit better to say something like 2012-12-01 T09:30:00, which is 9:30 a.m. local time on the 1st of December 2015. But we still don't know where local. It is kind of an agreement that that is the local time of the receiving party. But even that may not be helpful if we're talking about, I don't know, a Russian DSP. Russia has, I don't know, 5 or 6 time zones. Or might even be more, I don't know. So which of those time zones does it apply? Is it Moscow time, or is it St. Petersburg time, or is it the time in Kamchatka? Who knows? I don't know. So it might be better to then append a Z or a Z to the time code, which is then clear because it's UTC. Greenwich Mean Time or UTC time, or you can actually append the time code offset like -08:00, which is the Pacific Standard Time, for example. But this still doesn't really get us away from the problem that if people do use just start dates or use local time, we don't know really what 2020 12:01 to 2020 12:31 means. Yes, it's the 1st of December 2020 to the 31st of December of 2020, but it's local availability everywhere in December 2020. That's what that means. But that means that in Australia, it's well before the 1st of December in the US. And in the US, it's well after the 31st of December has passed in Australia. So that needs to be borne in mind when dealing with times. And there's a second issue about timing that's quite critical, and that's dealing with consecutive deals, where you have a deal that ends on a specific point in time, and then a replacement deal should start at that same point in time. And there need to be that we have reached an agreement how to deal these things with dates as well as date times. For dates, it's quite easy. Just use one day before the other day and you'll be fine. So the end date ends on the 31st of January 2018, and the start date is the 1st of February 2018, and there you have it. At midnight between the 31st and the 1st, at that moment, there is a switchover. And when using date times, the agreement is that the string to represent the date time, the end of the first deal, and the string that represents the date time of the start of the second deal needs to be the same. So it would be, in this case, for example, the 1st of February 2018 at 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds in both cases. Don't make the second thing 1 second later, because theoretically that means that the release will disappear for a second. That may not matter that greatly, but it might cause some kind of confusion at some stage. Just make it the same string. Also, don't use the feature that the ISO standard on which we're basing the format here, that you use the T240000 format to signal the end of the day and 00 hour 0 as the start of the day, and have different strings that are semantically the same. No, we decided it ought to be syntactically, letter by letter, the same string in both cases. So if we're having a deal, in the deal terms, we have a validity period, 2020 and 12/31. Oh, sorry. Start date. So let's say this just starts on the 1st. So here we have one deal that goes to release 1, and it starts on the or it ends on the 31st of December. On the 31st of December, yes. And if we want to have a second deal that I don't know, maybe we have a price information, price code cheap, and here I would put in that would be the DPID of the label. And if we now just copying this deal And we're now starting this on the 20, and we don't need an end date. And this is now we have one deal for the same release, R1, one deal starting on basically for the entire year of 2020 with a specific price information. And then we have another deal that starts on the 21st of on the 1st of January 2021. So that is directly adjacent. If we're using start date time, oops. So you then have a T, I don't know, I'll put some random thing in here. Here you would then end this typically and maybe you want to say it's in GMT, and then you would exactly use the same string here. But it's of course a date time now. So do not put a 01 here. That would be wrong, whether Zulu or not, because now this is different from that, and there will be a gap of one second in between it. Don't put a 2400 here on the 24, I guess is rather one. Don't do this, which is technically valid from the ISO standard, because this and this are two semantically equivalent strings, that it's the same moment in time. But we've decided we don't want this because it's much easier to compare, to find whether it's the same date, to compare whether it's actually meant to be adjacent if these two strings are the same. So do this. And the last thing that I want to talk about is talking about pre-orders and visibility. There are two different concepts that the DSP needs to observe when making material available. The first is, when are they allowed to make available the sound recordings or videos, the essence of a release to consumers? That's the validity period. That's the release availability, and in the validity period, within the deal terms, you have then a start date, end date, or start date time, end date time, which defines from when to when the stuff may be made available to consumers. But in addition, there is what we call release visibility. It's the time from when a specific aspect of the DSP may be shown to the consumer. That's the album, the existence of the album, the cover art, the track listing, and any potential previews. Those are separate dates. So it may be possible that a release is not available, so the consumer may not listen to the music, but a month earlier, the album may be resolved. Hey, that artist has created a new album. It will be out in a month's time. Here it is. Here is the album cover. I can't tell you the track listing yet. That'll be revealed in a week's time. Then the track listing goes live, and then the previews go live, and then on street day, the release becomes available to consumers. And that's something that we need to communicate. And that's where there happened to be a change between ERN 4.1 and 4.2. This is how it is in ERN 4.1 and ERN 3. You have the validity period, the start date time just is given here, and the individual visibility dates as part of the deal. So here you see a start date time of the of actually a structurally invalid 1st of May 2020 as a start time to make the release available, and from the 1st of February, 1st of March, you can have the release cover art 1st of February, and 1st of March the track listing available, for example. The problem is that If you're looking at a streaming deal, the individual tracks, for example, don't have a cover art, but the deal is for the individual track releases. So you have actually now the problem that you need to create a deal for an album that will never be available as an album. Only the track releases will be able to be streamed for that streaming DSP. So there is a problem there to communicate how these visibility dates work for these kind of track releases. And which is why in ERN 4, we have created separate to the release deals, these release visibility composites as part of the deal list. So they're still contractually important aspects that need to be observed. So the DSP may not show the release at all before the release display start date time, for example, but we can now point from those individual track releases to the track visibility section, and from the album release to the release visibility section, in addition to the overall deal pointing to the deal, which then has the start date for the availability. So in this case, the album has a specific display sequence. The track releases have specific 1 and 2 have specific visibility permissions, whereas track 3 will only become available on street date of that release. Those were the things that I think are the most critical ones, or the most discussed ones, and the ones that give lots of people a little bit of headache when implementing the ERN message.
Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you found that helpful. We will put this up on our website at some point in the next 2 or 3 days if you want to revisit it at your leisure. Otherwise, thanks for attending, and we will see you next time, I hope. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.